I know for a fact that this is one of the most difficult sessions for many reasons, reasons related to the time and related to the subject as well. So if the organizers want to get rid of a session or anything, they place it after lunch when bellies are full and minds are want to sleep or want to rest. My name is Saeed Al-Hashimi. It is my honor today to facilitate a session that is very important and that I will learn a lot from. This session will lead us to two main questions, the first of which, to what extent has the world and the globalization caught up with us in the cities that we live in here today? And the second question, which we would love to reach a principle of an answer for it, is where is the human in all of this, in globalization and in the city in the Gulf? But before that, please allow me to read an excerpt by Ibn Khaldun in his important book, the Book of the Pieces of Wisdom, the news of Arabs and Berber. Ibn Khaldun, as you know, is a historian and a sociologist, an important, actually he's the founder of the sociology, and he has lived in the 15th century. This sentence really attracted my attention, and I wanted to share it with you before we start with our speakers in this session. Ibn Khaldun says, know that cities are a decision taken by nations when the purposes of affluency are fulfilled. And so the nation prefers peace and quiet and chooses homes to settle down. And so when they settle down, then harms need to be deterred and protection must be provided and benefits must be brought upon to the residents of the city. And then once the city is built and completely constructed, according to the perspective of those who constructed it and according to the rulings of Allah, then the age of the city is the age of the state. If the age of the state is short, then the situation or the life of the city would stop and its urbanization would stop. If the life of the city extends, then buildings will continue to be built and constructed, and there would be more houses, markets, and facilities until the map expands and the area also expands, such as what happened in Baghdad, Qayrawan, Cordoba, and Cairo. And he concludes with this important piece of wisdom. Cities that are mere thrones for kings go away or perish once this state perishes. In this session, it is our honor to have an elite of researchers, and we will start with Dr. Mehran Kamarova. He is a professor of government at Georgetown University, Qatar, and director of the Iranian Studies Unit at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. He is very well known, and he will highlight the issue of urbanization and globalization in the Gulf within 15 minutes. Please start. شكرا جزيلا دكتور الهاشمي، يسرني ويشرفني أن أكون هنا.
And I also want to thank you for including that quote from Ibn Khaldun, which is actually quite appropriate to the subject of our discussion this afternoon, particularly what I want to discuss. I moved here to Doha 17 years ago, and I had never been exposed to any of the Gulf areas, any of the Gulf cities. I had known and traveled extensively in Cairo and Damascus and Alexandria, but like many students of the Middle East, my generation, we were not necessarily exposed to the politics, the topography, the developments that occur here in the Gulf region. And for me, coming here was in many ways a learning experience. And like many people who come to the region for the first time, one of the questions on my mind was, what do these cities mean? A city like Doha or a city like Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Are these new jungles of concrete? Are they bereft of identity? Are they blips on the radar, or do they represent something much more significant in terms of the politics, the diplomacy, the economic center of gravity of the Middle East, of a region that I had studied, but this part of which I knew very little about? And so over time, this question of what do these cities mean, and what does Doha signify for the rest of the Middle East, or Dubai or Abu Dhabi signify for the rest of the Middle East, is something that really preoccupied me. And so in studying this, I decided to, I realized rather that I had to divide my attention three ways. I had to figure out what these cities meant in themselves in terms of living spaces for people that who live there, for the residents, people they were trying to attract, what they meant for the rest of the region, where they indeed new regional hubs. There is a huge debate in Middle Eastern studies as to what these cities mean in terms of from a broader comparative perspective, in terms of what the rest of the Middle East means. And then what do they mean globally? Or more specifically, are they global cities or not? And I kind of wrestled particularly with the last question, are these global cities or not? And before I go any further, let me just share with you a definition of a global city or a world city, which kind of forms the focus of my research, and I'll come back to this, but I just want to share with you something in a preliminary manner in terms of what world cities are. World cities, and this is a quote from two scholars who actually, one, Michael Ewers, who lived here and was affiliated with the Doha Institute. World cities, these two scholars say, are the headquarters of global capitalism and centers of business, advanced producer services, trade and banking, sites of economic and social interaction that can be arranged hierarchically based on the level of global investment and economic power that they have attracted. So in many ways, the definition of a global city, at least that definition that is common among scholars and students of the region, is intimately tied with globalization and what globalization means. And so I will share with you the answer that I came up with in terms of what these cities mean at national, regional, and local level. And then for the remaining 10 minutes or so, I'll walk you through my own intellectual journey and what I was able to discover, or the questions that were posed to me as I was studying this, and then maybe we can have an open discussion and I can learn, or I can fill in the remaining pieces of the puzzle. First of all, at the national level, at the local level, these are comparatively livable spaces. They have no doubt up-to-date amenities. They are safe. You know that Doha and Singapore every year compete with one another. in terms of the world's #1 or #2 safest city. And they have expansive and extensive infrastructures that are the envy of the rest of the region. No doubt, the infrastructure and the amenities that are in these cities meant largely to attract what are called the creative classes and to keep the local national population happy. They're world class, and they are incomparable in many ways. At the regional level, in fact, we will see that many of these cities have become hubs in a number of respects, in logistics, in services, even in science and culture, and in terms of innovation. So at the regional level, it seems like Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai, at least in terms of services, logistics, port facilities, have bested the traditional hearts of the Middle East, the Cairos, the Baghdads, the Damascuses of the Middle East. At the global level, the record is somewhat more mixed. And as global cities, I think the record is somewhat more spotty. And I think there's much more room for debate and question. So before we delve into each of these three areas, let me start out with what we mean by kind of livable cities and what they are in national levels. And we all know that over the last 3 to 4 decades, these cities, particularly Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai, have gone through what may be called hyper-urbanism. A hyper-urbanism in which an overwhelming majority of the population is now urban, whereby 50 years ago it was not necessarily. And this urbanism, this massive, concerted, deliberate effort at urbanization is driven largely by a number of factors, the most important of which is the vision of the leadership. The leadership in each of these countries, or in each of these cities, the rulers in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, have specific visions in terms of what they want to, what their cities ought to be and what they want to project in terms of their cities. Then, once you have this leadership vision of what Doha, Dubai, Abu Dhabi ought to look like, the logic of market capitalism has taken over and has complemented it. So you can't just say, well, this is the logic of, or the vision of the leadership, because the logic of market capitalism has taken over. But there are a number of other factors that have also been involved in fostering and facilitating and expediting this urbanization. Regional competition between Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. Each of these have been competing with one another. A proliferation of free trade zones across the Gulf region. Land reclamations. Those of you who've lived here for a while know, for example, that 50 years ago the West Bay didn't exist. Something like 20, 30 years ago, Qatar didn't exist. Certainly, the mountain didn't exist. And so there's been massive land reclamation, whether in Lusail or the Pearl or the islands, the many artificial islands in the UAE all over. And of course, permitting foreigners, non-nationals, to buy property, particularly in Dubai. That has also propelled this logic of urbanization. There's been massive government investment in real estate, in terms of MR, for example, in terms of developments in Mosharraf throughout the Gulf region. And of course, what has resulted in initially these cities that were bereft of identity. They didn't really have identity. It was the logic of market capitalism. And incidentally, in a place like UAE, it was the capitalists, the primary investors were members of the ruling family. So it was kind of this logic of accumulation of wealth that took over and made these cities these entities that did not necessarily have an identity, a unique identity of their own. A number of factors were used to describe them: hybrid, transnational, a-national, cosmopolitan. Somebody even called them airport cities. They're modern, they're convenient, they have all the facilities like airports, but they also don't have a character, like any airport anywhere in the world. And that prompted a campaign of public art in two of the three cities, in Doha and in Abu Dhabi. And of course, in Doha, there was also this deliberate effort at heritage-making architecture. A few years ago, the government of Qatar dictated that all new buildings had to reflect a certain sense of heritage and architecture. So these cities that have been meant to keep nationals happy and to attract the creative classes from around the world so they would migrate here have world-class amenities and are quite livable spaces. They work, in other words, as cities. As regional hubs, they're also no doubt newer, safer, more modern, and the question is, are they the new heart of the Middle East? Now, if I were Egyptian or Syrian, probably I would have a different take on this. There's a big debate, particularly by Syrian scholars, that say, well, just the fact that Dubai or Doha can have a singer from some Lebanese singer doesn't mean these are the new centers of civilization or culture. But by all accounts, these are indeed centers of world-class universities, places like where we are right now, where innovation, technology, if not technological innovation, certainly intellectual innovation takes place. And these are, of course, important. So they are centers of science and culture in terms of universities and libraries. They're centers of logistics and services, airports like Hamad International Airport, Dubai Airport, even Abu Dhabi Airport, seaports, of course, Jebel Ali, that are the envy of the traditional ports across the Middle East. And of course, Dubai is the center of money and finance, as are in many ways Doha and Abu Dhabi. But Dubai also has tourism as well as medical tourism. That's an important factor. So they are indeed regional hubs. And finally, let me ask the question as to whether or not these are also global cities. Again, let me remind you of a definition of a global city, and allow me to share with you the definition given by Saskia Sassen, who is really in many ways the preeminent scholar of global cities in terms of what she says. She attributes three main characteristics to a city for it to be global. And allow me to quote. One, command points in the organization of the global economy. Command points in the organization of the global economy. Two, key locations and marketplaces for the leading industries of the current period, finance and specialized services for firms. And three, major sites of production. Major sites of production, including the production of innovation for those industries and products that are not simply a function of talent, but are made, things that are made. So if we apply that definition, we see that as global cities, the record is somewhat more mixed. These are not necessarily nodes in global networks of production, manufacturing, and distribution. Doha and Abu Dhabi, yes, they are indeed key nodes in the distribution of oil and liquefied natural gas. Dubai might be center of global finance, financial markets, logistics, and services, but the record is mixed. So indeed, whereas the cities are livable spaces, the new centers of innovation and hubs in relation to the rest of the Middle East, they are yet to become global cities. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا للدكتور مهران الذي
Sir Mahran.
So Dr. Bahran talked about a number of concepts such as global cities and the relationship with the residents of those cities, and also the globalization impact on the GCC in general. And we're going to give the floor to our speaker who is specialized in the field. We have Dr. Safa. Dr. Safa is an associate professor at the College of Geography from the Hussein bin Talal University from Jordan. She has a PhD from the Jordanian University. So you have 15 minutes, Dr. Safa. I would like to make the best of the time allocated. I would like to thank Dr. Bahran. Indeed, he talked about globalization. He concentrated on the definition of globalization from an economic perspective, but I'm going to try not to concentrate on the economic side in order to save time. And I would like to talk about the East coastal areas in Saudi Arabia. I would like to talk about this topic from a demographic perspective, the particularities from a demographic perspective. The eastern part of Saudi Arabia has a diversity in terms of the demographic makeup. We're talking about 5 million is the population, and this is in keeping with the statistics that we receive. So 57% of this total population are Saudis, approximately less than half, approximately almost half of the total population of that area is non-Saudis. When it comes to the demographic makeup and the age groups, 40% of the people in those areas are between 15 to 54. For 34, sorry. So when we study the demographic makeup in terms of age, so any balanced population, so the makeup is balanced when it comes to the age groups. So in the Arab countries, so we mostly have the majority is children, then youth, and then the elderly. But when it comes to the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, 40% is youth. So this is, I mean, it makes sense because these are mostly workers. So when we talk about globalization, so it seems that there are a number of factors that have been mixed up in one kind of perspective, so we do not know anymore what is impacting the other. Every component is impacting the other component of this general makeup that we see in those coastal areas in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia. We're talking about a number of factors that impact the quality of life and public health, environmental impacts. So we talk about air pollution. This is one of the most important challenges that the cities face, particularly when it comes to heavy industrial activities. There are reports by the agency, which is in charge of the environmental aspects. They're talking about increased levels of nitrogen and so on, and so oxide nitrogen. So this is well beyond the average level. And also, we're talking about certain other materials that are well beyond the average that is accepted worldwide. So there is a huge gap with regard to the recommended amounts and what exists in the MEM. And this impacts the health in the MEM. That is why we see so many cases of respiratory problems and diseases in the MEM. So we have the leakage of pollutants into water, and also we have leakage into seawater. And the reports show that the pollution of water has increased a great deal in the GCC, and this has impacted maritime life and fishing. There are reports that show that there is a huge increase in terms of pollutants when it comes to the Dammam coast. There are high concentrations of heavy metals that are impacting a great deal maritime life, such as certain materials such as lead and so on and so forth. So this has impacted the habitat in those areas, and we have seen a deterioration when it comes to biological diversification. These coastal cities used to have huge diversity of fauna and flora, and this is being impacted by this expansion and also as a result of also pollution. So we have so many animals, so many turtles, for instance, land turtles that lost their habitat as a result of this pollution, and therefore we no longer find so many as they used to be the case in the past. And this is not only impacting at Dammam, but also Al Khubar. 30% of the people are impacted directly by these repercussions of pollution. If we move into the social challenges that these areas are facing, so the whole region faces so many challenges. There is an increased demand for education and health services. This is not something that is in keeping with what the state can provide. So when it comes to the large growth of the people and also the urban expansion and development makes it very difficult for the state to cater for the needs of the population and to give them adequate accommodation or residential areas that would be in keeping with this increasing exponential growth of the population. And also this impacts coexistence amongst the people. And of course, there are so many other challenges. These cities, they rely heavily on revenues coming from oil and gas, and this makes the livelihood of those people fluctuate as a result of the fluctuations in the pricing of oil and gas, and this impacts the different industrial projects as a result of the decline in the prices of oil. And we should not forget that there is also a huge pressure on the infrastructure, and this entails that the state should do its best to cater for the need of the population. And the Statistic Authority says that unemployment among Saudi youth is 12%. So we have a huge problem, irrespective of all the economic development. And this poses so many questions when it comes to the future of this region. So we have four scenarios, possible scenarios. The first scenario is sustainable growth and environmental development. In order to achieve such development, it is necessary to concentrate on environmental development and also to concentrate on sustainable growth and development. We have a project in the area that tries to reinforce sustainability in terms of environment through the reliance on solar energy and also wind energy. This entails that technological innovations should be encouraged. And we have noticed that in recent time that there were so many attempts that have been made to diversify the economy in order to rely less on revenues coming from oil. So there are efforts exerted in order to develop certain sectors such as medical care, education, technology, and it is expected that these cities will have the establishment of certain incubators and accelerators for technologies in order to support startups and SMEs. The third scenario is the urban expansion. This is going to lead to more demographic growth, and at the same time, this would entail the enhancement of the infrastructure, and consequently, officials are required to develop new commercial and residential areas, new compounds and residential complexes in Dammam, and to enhance also transportation. 3 days ago, or perhaps last week, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has inaugurated Riyadh Metro. It is a precedent for Riyadh. And I read before I came to the hall, there was a report about the prices of the tickets. These are competitive prices, and they are like 0.05% of the Saudi Arabian income. So these are very interesting and competitive prices. The fourth scenario, we have economic and environmental challenges that these cities are going to face. So we're talking about limited resources and also fluctuations in terms of the economy. So looking into the future of these cities in keeping with the 2030 agenda or vision. So, cities in the coastal area, particularly in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, these cities are part and parcel of the details that are included in Saudi Arabian vision in order to diversify incomes and revenues other than oil and gas to make these centers, these cities centers for commerce, tourism, and technology, sustainability, and also digital transformation that is going to enhance the position of these cities. And part of the strategy of Saudi Arabia, there is another strategy that aims to make these cities a destination in terms of tourism and to develop cities such as Al Khubar and Al Dammam for them to have large cultural centers and resorts, hotels, for these cities to become global touristic destinations. Technology and innovation, these are part and parcel of Saudi Arabia's vision. These cities, they aim to reinforce digital transformation and adoption of new technologies to enhance services and infrastructure and to develop smart cities that rely on AI technologies and the Internet of Things, and also it relies on cloud computing. So when we talk about NEOM, NEOM is one of the examples of smart cities, irrespective of our reservations. But yesterday, one of the speakers talked about theories that are expected to develop GCC cities. I talked about NEOM as perhaps being a modern theory of urban development. I'm not talking about Saudi Arabia only. So the areas in the GCC have developed from fishing and pearl fishing villages into smart cities similar to Neom and other kinds of cities. Is this going to lead to negative repercussions? We don't know. Is this going to be emulated? Yes. Investment in technology and innovation is going to reinforce the position of coastal cities in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia in order to attract startups, SMEs, and the vision has one of its most important pillars, which is environmental sustainability. And Saudi Arabia tries to strike a balance between the preservation of the environment and the economic development. There are a number of projects that are taken into account when it comes to building residential areas that are environmentally friendly to increase green areas and spaces. So these are the most important points that I wanted to underline in my intervention. The eastern coastal cities, they play a pivotal role in the achievement and implementation of the 2030 Saudi Arabia's vision to reinforce innovation, sustainability. These cities enjoy advanced infrastructures and also very important locations. They are ready to become centers for technology, innovation, development, tourism, and these cities can forge the future of Saudi Arabia and to reinforce its position globally. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Safa, for your generosity. You've given us 2 extra minutes. We will invest them. We will invest in these 2 minutes in the discussion with the attendees. Thank you for mentioning the key challenges in the cities of the Eastern Coast and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, the third speaker is Dr. Simona Azali. She is an associate professor at the Department of Architecture in the Canadian University, Dubai. She holds a PhD in urban planning and design from the University of Qatar and a master's of visual design from the School of Design in Politecnico di Milano, Italy. We look forward to her research, a paper entitled The Gulf City, Rapid Urban Transformations and Globalization, a critical review of.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start my presentation with a quick review of about the urban transformations that the Gulf region has experienced over the last few decades. Indeed, this is a region that is like experiencing dramatic transformation, and it's one of the regions with the highest growing. It's one of the region which is one of the fastest growing areas globally. Specifically, if we look at the city of Dubai, we see, like you can see it from the screen, how initially it was a very small village nestled around the creek and by the sea. Being characterized by fishing and pearl diving, but thanks to discovery of the oil and the influx of capitals, for the last 20 years, indeed, it has been sprawling and expanding, as again you can see from this slide. Looking a little bit more into the population of Dubai and its composition, we see once again that in just 1 year, and specifically from July 2022 and July 2023, the population of the city increased by approximately 100,000 new residents, which is a quite impressive thing, if you think about it. But, and I will discuss this further in the end of the presentation, there are expectations for the city to almost double by 2040. So it is expected for the city to increase by 2.5 million in like 15 years or so. So of course, this growth, urban and from a population perspective, poses a lot of challenges from like an environmental point of view, but also in terms of social aspects. Again, looking into the demographics, this time relating the whole country, but they are very similar in Dubai. We see how the UAE are home to more than 200 nationalities. So, like almost 90% of the residents are foreigners, and only 10% are Emirati nationals. Like making the Emiratis themselves being a minority in their own country. This is kind of similar with like similar, let's say, percentages in other Gulf countries. But again, if we look at how the foreigners are distributed, we see that almost 62% comes from the Indian subcontinent, with India almost 40%, and then Pakistan and Bangladesh. Another important aspect is the gender imbalance. So once again, we see how almost like 70% of the population is represented by males, and only 1/3 of the population belongs to the female gender. Especially, again, if you look at the slide, in an age group which is quite young, 25, between 55 years. This is all just to give you a little bit of a background of like how Dubai, it's, as we all know, a very young city, a wealthy city, a booming city. But if we look at its rapid urban growth, we might notice that maybe the planning system and the urban growth has been managed with some difficulties. Probably these rapid transformations and this rapid population growth has led to massive, what I call the massive fragmentation. This fragmentation has several layers, being mainly spatial, physical, but also social, managerial, and political. From a spatial or physical point of view, of course, if we look a little bit on how the city has developed, we may refer to the 1970s master plan for the city. This is where the modernist principles were introduced with the creation of an extensive ring road systems, other radial networking kind of streets. And this is where also there was the emergence of single-family communities. The master plan was created side by side with the introduction of a national housing scheme that was offering free land to the local families, to the citizens. And this had increased the already kind of sprawling, urban sprawling of the city, with the result of creating a landscape that it was very fragmented on one hand, but also very uniform, and also in some ways very unaffordable as well. Coming to this second, let's say, growth, the second phase in the growth of the city, this is where we, aside from the physical fragmentation, we see also the rise of the social fragmentation as well. This is when, again, there was the creation of an extended and structured road system, but also a massive zoning was introduced to create various areas for the industries, for the commerce, for residencies, and so on and so forth. This is where also some communities for middle income were introduced. It was mentioned this morning, Dubai International City. Yes, those residents were mainly kind of characterized for being mid-rise type of buildings. What you see in this picture, in this slide, it's actually a correlation between the rent prices and also the housing types. What it is clear is that, especially if we look at the medium but especially low-income populations of the city, they tend to live in certain typical areas that definitely are not central or not so much central, but also they are characterized by having very organic density, if you want, and also mixed-use kind of developments. It's also interesting to see the various housing typologies that have been introduced and that characterize the city. Again, I mentioned that Dubai is home to more than 200 different nationalities, and so in a way it's very multi-ethnic. Again, it has one of the highest ratio of migrants to citizens in the world, and this is in a way reflected in the way the city has been developed, but also in the housing typology that kind of vary according to nationality or nationalities or ethnicity, and most importantly to income. There are two main points that may be worth discussion when we consider the urban growth of the city. On one hand, urban mega projects that have been discussed since yesterday quite extensively, and of course they are part of the strategy of Dubai, of the country, and most generally, if you want, of the Gulf cities, which are once again state-led projects aimed to, on one hand, try to boost the economic growth, but also to kind of resonate with the global prestige that the leading authorities aim to achieve. Of course, this is done quite often at the expense of like who is really building those projects. Very often, one of the consequences is the creation of displacement of existing community that has to, face again gentrification issues. The other thing is, of course, the housing market that has been extensively characterized by high prices and very little amount of affordable housing. So if we look specifically at some neighborhoods in Dubai, and for example Bur Dubai, but most importantly Deira and Satwa, we see how those developments are again characterized by having a very organic type of growth and infrastructure, aging infrastructure as well. They are dominated once again by low-income workers. And especially if you look at Satwa, because of its location, which is in between Jumeirah and also on the other side, the World Trade Center, the financial district, and the little south downtown, this is where there is a very high risk of gentrification issues. Once again, the lack of affordable housing options have also forced many of these communities to live in very difficult or substandard conditions. Sometimes, again, because of the gentrification that is going on, they are pushed at the periphery of the city, which leads in, higher commute times, higher transportation costs, spatial segregation, and so on and so forth. Also, those residents often engage in informal adaptations or everyday kind of form of urbanism, and this was so beautifully discussed this morning by Dr. Yasser. So on one hand, they try to modify the housing units in order to accommodate more people. In the other hand, they try to create in the streetscape or in the open spaces informal markets, public social, economic activities that are really driven by their necessity. So, what could be some, if you want, recommendations that the city should look at for future urban growth? Of course, some of them may seem quite obvious, and they are, of course, very broad also, but definitely there is the need to promote affordable housing development. So in terms of, for example, I don't know, through subsidies or through frameworks that would encourage the private sector to participate as well in order to decrease the imbalance between the different housing options. But of course, these affordability needs also to be implemented side by side with inclusive forms of urban planning, and this is something that's kind of lacking in this region. So the need, for example, to involve a more participatory type of approaches to planning, considering all local communities to be kind of engaged in the decision making process. The other thing is probably to also enhance public transportation infrastructure. So in Dubai, there are metro lines and there is a bus system, but definitely it's not enough. Then something could be done to improve it. And here maybe we could look at transport-oriented development projects that promote a mix of uses, that promote also other forms of mobility, like walking, for example, or cycling as well. So, this is... If, again, we go back to Dubai and if we look at the 2040 master plan, This is where actually the local authorities have plans to make the population grow by 2.5 million, as I was mentioning just at the beginning of the presentation, reaching a population of about 6 million people by 2040. So my questions here is, can Dubai afford that many more people? So should authorities consider revising the plan, or if not, what could be the strategies that should be adopted to reach this huge increase of the population? What we are experiencing now as Dubai residents is that the urban infrastructure is already like over capacity. So it's already really stretched, especially if we look at mobility and transport infrastructure. So if this is the goal, of course, it needs to be very carefully planned, and especially considering that the majority of this population increase will be foreign labor and blue-collar workers as well. And this is going to exacerbate once again the social issues that the city is facing. So I just want to conclude my presentation with one possible actionable strategy. Recently in the news, it was announced that the current Dubai International Airport is going to be shut, and the Al Maktoum Airport in the south of the city is going to fully replace it. Of course, this is going to take a lot of years, but if this is the case, in the heart of the city, there is going to be a vacant area of around 3,000 hectares, so a huge one. So this represents an opportunity, of course, but also a challenge as well, because of the proximity of the airport to the old city. Like the redevelopment could offer, the opportunity to kind of tackle the issue of affordable housing shortage. On the other hand, of course, this is going to maybe be another luxury mega project that is going to be created. There are examples here that we could look at, like Paya Lebar in Singapore or Athens, although in different kind of scales. But definitely this could be an opportunity to try to tackle this shortage. Whatever it's going to happen, of course, we don't know. But to conclude, I believe that whatever the direction of the city is and whatever the decisions of the authorities are, definitely we need to think about a possible paradigm shifts in the way the city and its growth is going to be planned. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا دكتورة سيمونا. قبل أن نفتح باب النقاش أرجو أن تحيوا المنصة.
The questions and answers, would like to thank all the panelists for being really committed to the time allocated for their interventions. We'd like to thank the dear professors